Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're privileged to have a returning guest today, Greg Crowe, President and CEO of Silver One Resources. He's an insider in the precious metals and silver mining industry. He's here to talk with us about a turning of the tide in the precious metals in general, but specifically affecting silver markets going forward. Greg, thanks for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you very much, Don. Again, it's a pleasure to come back and talk with you again.
We'd like to get your insights into some dynamics that are changing very rapidly in this last quarter in the precious metals markets and, frankly, in the economy as a whole and in the financial markets. If we could start it off with sort of the context or the backdrop behind what some major forces are that are driving financial markets. We've had several guests on our show, including Gregory Mannarino, the host of TradersChoice.net, and Rob Kirby, who is a proprietary analyst on the precious metals and financial markets, talking to us about the importance of the bond market and the interest rate curve and what the Fed's actions are that are affecting that and attempting to influence that, even though sometimes market forces themselves predominate. And one of the big factors there that people have been watching is with the Fed's easy money policy, and frankly all the world central banks' easy money policy for the past decade or so. We've seen this monotonic increases for so many years in the overall stock and equity markets, but we've seen a lot of pressure on precious metals, and silver included. Now we're for the last several quarters, we've heard lots of different messages coming from the Fed as far as whether they plan on doing additional rate hikes into 2019. Some people said there was going to be a 4 rate hike. Some said, and they said maybe it'll be 2. Most recently, just late last week, the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, talked about perhaps maintaining an accommodative policy going forward, and also having flexibility in the unwinding of their balance sheet. So this seems to be spelling a change of the winds for the financial markets, and we're seeing definitely volatility in the stock markets, but silver and other precious metals have been on a tear recently. So could you talk to us about, is this financial market tide change all that we're thinking it might be? And if so, what does that mean about this time as a backdrop for precious metals?
Well, okay, many factors in there that I could go on about, but in essence, I guess I just want to state that, first of all things are cyclical, and we seem to be going under another cycle change. We've seen a tear on the stock markets, and we've had a long bull market. We've seen a run-up in the value of the U.S. dollar, and as a consequence of both of those, which are certainly stimulated and helped by Trump's policies with respect to taxation and deregulation after he came into power. And that seems to have run a bit of its course. The Fed has been talking about raising interest rates incrementally, as you mentioned. And yes, indeed, they have done several rate hikes, and they did talk about several more rate hikes to come in 2019, until, as you said, just late last week, they seem to have a change of heart. Now, what brought about that change of heart was they're kind of market followers, and they have seen that the markets are starting to get a little shaky. We're seeing downturn in big tech stocks like Apple. We're seeing major fluctuations in the Dow and the S&P. And does this signify the end of the bull market with respect to major markets? This could be very good for gold and silver, because where do you put your money if the markets start coming down, if the U.S. dollar starts coming off, which it has as well, And where are you going to put your money? Well, usually the safe haven has been gold and silver. And right now, you might want to put some into base metals, because even though there are trade wars going on with China, China is still under growth, and there's going to be a major demand for both base metals and precious metals coming up. The last bull run we had in precious metals was started in about 2002, 2003, after a major collapse of the markets, particularly the tech markets in 2000, 2001. And I have the feeling that we're about to enter one of those cycles again. That led to about a 10-year run on precious metal markets.
And you mentioned that after the dot-com collapse, and you've been around this industry for decades, you also mentioned industrial base metals, but silver is also an industrial metal as well as an investment metal. It's both precious and industrial, and has investor demand and industrial demands. So both geologically speaking and financially speaking, do you consider silver to be the ultimate form of money?
Well, I don't know if it's the ultimate. I think gold, you can certainly tie that into a form of money as well. But I think silver is much more interesting because it is also an industrial element, and there are many industrial uses. The actual investment side of silver only accounts for about 20 to 30%. But what's interesting is what drives the price silver on a per ounce basis is that investor sentiment, and we're seeing a change of that investor sentiment now. Currently, silver uses, the production is falling just short of the demand. It's been in a deficit since 2012, but we haven't seen major fluctuations in the price apart from downwards since 2016. But then again, that's mainly due to the strengthening of the U.S. dollar and the tear that went through the stock markets in the U.S. with the Trump policies. So once that changes and the investor sentiment starts coming back into silver, then silver will perform. Now, gold is also considered a currency, but gold is more expensive. So silver is more attractive to a lot of individuals as a cheap man's investment. And usually what happens is when there is a return to a bull market run in precious metals, silver tends to outperform gold on a percentage basis. So I'm a big silver fan.
We've had David Morgan from themorganreport.com on as well, and he talked about exactly what you just described, including that sometimes silver may lead or lag gold, but generally it will perform at some multiple of the move in gold will generally be amplified by the move in silver. And you mentioned in passing there about the potential for China or other nations turning away from the dollar, and that's one of the concerns that some of our guests have also expressed is the amount of U.S. Treasury debt that has been dumped by either Russia or by China and other emerging countries, and in general a lack of or a loss of trust in fiat currencies in general. And when you mentioned the sort of the poor man's gold and the attractiveness, we've had guests talk to us about gift-giving traditions and family investing traditions in India and in China and other Asian Rim countries, which is very important. So do you believe, and you mentioned also been in short supply, can you talk to us a little bit about where is the major demand coming from, and do you think that we'll hit any kind of a wall in terms of running out of physical supply to meet that increasing demand in the near future?
Well, first of all, with respect to supply, let's talk about supply of silver. Major silver producers around the world are Mexico, number one. We're looking at Peru and Bolivia, number two and number three. China as well. The United States kind of falls far behind with respect to those other major producing countries for silver. So, and also, silver has been in deficit with respect to demand since 2012. Not critically so, but it's still in deficit. And also with respect to mining production in Mexico, It started to decrease in the last couple of years. So what does that bode? First of all, pure silver mines are very, very difficult to find. Our company, Silver One, certainly has a very pure silver mine, and there are some other mining companies out there that have very high percentage of their revenues generated through silver, such as First Majestic, etc. But it's really hard to find. Secondly, with respect to with respect to demand for silver, we're looking at essentially, as you mentioned, places like China, India, which is up and coming, Indonesia, and the other Asian countries. That's not going to ease off. Big uses for silver are in the photovoltaic industry, solar panels, etc. Also, it's one of the major uses of silver is in connections, electrical connections, in your computer, in your cell phone, in your electric cars, which are increasing in demand as well. Also in alloys and brazing, etc. Very high uses. And surprisingly enough, there's still quite a bit used in jewelry, silverware, and in the photographic industry. Up and coming as well is the medical industry. As we enter a phase of these super bugs, which are resistant to antibiotics, we're seeing a return to the use of silver wrappings for burn victims, wounds, surgical instruments, gurneys, anything that will help fight bacterial growth. And so we're returning to silver. I see a great future for silver.
We've had medical doctor Jay Nielsen, MD, who was a former FDA researcher, on talking about colloidal silver also as an actual remedy for certain types of resistant and chronic diseases. So there's not only external, appliance type uses for it, but also potentially for internal for treatment. And could you talk to us a little bit about one of the things that a lot of silver producers are different from your company, Silver One, is that they may produce silver kind of as a side product if they're really going after gold or copper or whatever else. But if I understand correctly, and please, set the record straight for us, that Silver One Resources is all about silver. That's the product that you're going after.
Well, that's essentially what we are aiming for, and we have acquired right to acquire 100% interest in a pure silver mine called the Candelaria Silver Mine in Nevada. It was a previous producer, and it was historically one of the highest grade silver producers in the state of Nevada, produced up until 1997, and the last producer was Kinross Gold. And all told, they produced about 68 million ounces of silver, and there was very little byproduct. Now, that doesn't mean that we will remain a pure silver company, because as nature would have it, as you go deeper into these systems, and there's lots of potential for additional mineralization, which we would have to essentially drill for to prove, but lots of potential to change the nature of the system as you go to depth, adding perhaps more lead, zinc, and copper, and gold as well. We also have acquired the rights on another major project in the eastern part of Nevada called Cherokee, which was an old miner producer, but we've outlined an area of significant mineralization. But that mineralization is not just pure silver, it also has a bit of copper and gold associated with it as well. So as time goes on, will we remain a pure silver company? No, but our main asset seems to be pure silver at this time.
And one of our guests, again, Rob Kirby, talks about the potential for critical shortages of physical silver on the COMEX if people stand for delivery, and it's been so heavily leveraged with paper contracts, hedging one way or the other, whether it's to manipulate the price or it's actually to actually protect physical positions. It's hard for people to determine. But if people come up critically short for physical silver, standing for delivery on the COMEX or other large exchanges. Is this one of the reasons why it's an important time for you guys who are developing new mines to become producers of that new physical stream?
Well, yes, indeed. And I think the important thing for a company like ourselves, which is a very small company wanting to become a larger company, is try to go out and acquire some key ground positions that will put us in a place that when the major turnaround comes in the commodity cycle, that we're getting close to a production decision so that we can be able to help supply that market. One thing that a lot of companies do is they wait until it's too late, and then by the time they go through the permitting process and the financial processes of raising the money to bring a mine into production, they've missed the cycle. I think we're ahead of that. I think we can move forward, and but time will tell. And we have spent the last 2 years, in spite of the fact we've had pretty heavy headwinds with respect to precious metals, and we've been affected by it ourselves with a major decrease in our share price over the last couple of years. But we've taken the time to position ourselves by acquiring these key properties. With the Candelaria itself in Nevada, the past producer, we're currently evaluating that with respect to bringing the old heaps back into production. So we're doing metallurgical testing. If that works out, we're going to move forward to the next stage.
Looking at the research report that's available at portfoliowealthglobal.com/silver, noticing that your focus is in Nevada and Mexico, why are those favorable regions for silver production?
Well, first of all, geology has favored those regions, but there are other regions around the world. I mean, as I mentioned, Peru and Bolivia are very significant, as is China with respect to silver production, as is Russia and some other countries. But the beauty of Nevada is it's in the United States. It has rule of law. It has defined environmental policies. It has defined permitting policies, and you may not like how long it may take to get a permit, but at least you know that if you follow the rules, you're going to get the permit. You go to some other countries, and if the government changes and they don't like you, they just take the property away from you. And I spent my previous stint in Mongolia, and the governments there were up and down, and they changed, and they made several attempts to take assets away from companies. And I don't want to see that happen again. I really like Nevada. I think it's rated on the Fraser Institute as one of the top 3 mining jurisdictions in the world. Mexico itself is a major silver producing country. It's probably the largest silver producing country, and so far it has had good policies in place.
If we could swing back a minute ago, you talked about how the long, protracted, depressed price environment in the precious metals, and by golly, a lot of our viewers who have been holding physical precious metals have been feeling some stress about that over the past half a decade or more. But you're saying it has affected mining companies such as Silver One Resources. We've certainly seen the effect on your stock price, where you came out in September of 2016 pricing like at $1.25 per share Canadian, and recently traded as low as 13 cents Canadian for a 90% drop overall. So that's a real beatdown. But then in the last several weeks, or 3 months ago, it's been a real changing of the seas, and now from $12 million market cap up to $20 million market cap. That's a long way from your $120 million peak where you were, but it sounds like there's a story there for a potential comeback that could be explosive. Is that what you're seeing in terms of potential for return to shareholder value in your company?
Yeah, well, essentially in 2016 when we formed the company, and one of our major backers was First Mining Finance, now First Mining Gold, which Keith Neumeyer is the chairman of. They're major shareholders of our company, and they're major backers of our company. In 2016, when we formed the company, silver prices were in the low to mid 20s. dollars per ounce, and these other companies that back us were trading very, very much higher as well. And it was a very bullish market. But when in November Trump won the election and he brought in the changes in policies with respect to taxation and deregulation, then that changed the sentiment, and you saw the takeoff in the market. So silver value came down, precious metal values came down, and silver companies and precious metal companies all came down as well. We're not the only company that came down 70, 80, 90%, but a lot of the others did as well. But as I said, we spent that time building up the asset base of the company. Now, I personally believe that we are on the verge of another precious metals cycle. And with that, then we are poised for growth. And I am hoping, and I'll do my best to make sure that we are, shall we say, the recipient of the largesse of that growth in the precious metal markets.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about how David Morgan, when he's been on our show, and I'm thinking of Turd Ferguson from the TF Metals Report, both have mentioned, and Jay Taylor for that matter, have mentioned, you mentioned about the multiplicative effect that happens with silver moving disproportionately more than gold generally in whichever way the precious metals market goes. But they would talk about how miners, mining stocks can move even at a multiple sometimes of 2 or 3 times the metals price as well. So there's even more leverage, which can cut both ways. But when you've turned the tide and you're in a rising cycle, it can be, a multiplier to the positive as far as leveraging people who want to take advantage of or take a position in a rising metals market to look at well-managed mining companies. I'm thinking of Rick Rule, legendary resource investor from the past 40 years, talking about how some of the companies he invested in at $1 went to 10 cents before going to $10. So certainly looks like it might be a setting up for that kind of a rebound in the precious metals markets, and I guess that's your view for being a silver producer at this time going forward, is that it looks like an auspicious time to be looking at well-managed mining companies, including Silver One Resources.
Well, sure. And if you want to look at, some of the discrepancies between gold, silver prices going forward, and some of the things that's going to propel silver prices at a higher rate than gold, then you can look at the traditional gold-silver ratio as well, which a lot of people like to talk about. And fundamentally, over the last several decades, the average gold-silver ratio has been between the 50 and 60 to 1. So it takes you 50 to 60 ounces of silver to buy an ounce of gold. Currently, that's sitting at about 81, 82, and it's been as high as 86, 87. Mm-hmm. If you look at the cycles, then what you're going to see is that every time it seems to get up just over 80, then it turns and it starts correcting itself. And we're starting to see that. It's come from 86 down to about 81. And it's usually in these bull markets, you see a correction of this ratio. And if it does go back down to 50 to 60 to 1, then that's part of the driving force with respect to the performance of silver, which is preferentially higher than the performance of gold in a bull market. And yes, a lot of these mining companies as well will take advantage of that. You're seeing it's a lot easier to buy shares in a company that you've got confidence in than it is to buy physical gold or silver and cart it around, etc. Quite heavy.
I'm cracking up again because I'm remembering another quote from David Morgan. He said that when the gold-silver ratio gets too far out of whack like it is now, he tends to fill up his glove compartment of his pickup truck with gold and take it into the coin shop and exchange it for the whole bed of his pickup truck full of silver, and vice versa when the ratio gets the other way around. So maybe that's one visual image of exactly what you're talking about. Again, just to remind it. Sure. Remind everybody that they can get a free research report by going to portfoliowealthglobal.com/silver. And I guess, Greg, if there's anything that I haven't asked you that you think is relevant for people who want to find out more about Silver One Resources, could you share that with us?
Yeah, just jump on our website, www.silverone.com. There's some good presentations there, etc. I'm going to be out and about giving presentations. I traveled extensively through Europe, through London, and through the United States. And if anybody hears about me, you're more than welcome to come and attend the presentation.
We've been speaking with Greg Crowe. He is the president and CEO of Silver One Resources. He is an insider in the silver and precious metals industry, and he's been back with us here again on Reluctant Preppers to give us an update at this time, which seems to be a shifting of the tides and a turning of the winds that may mean that 2019 is the beginning of a bull run in precious metals, and especially outpaced by silver. So, Greg, thanks so much for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
Thanks, Dunnigan. Appreciate it.